Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have an 8-game Major League Baseball slate. There doesn't seem to be too many weather issues today. There might be some rain sprinkled in some of these games, but for the most part, they should all play. With that said, we do have a home run call to call out today. Kevin A. got Toscar Hernandez yesterday, so shout out to him. Make sure to drop your home run calls in the comments below. Also, please like, comment, and subscribe. That really does help the channel a lot. With that said, let's get into this core plays. Here first on DraftKings, I have Wilmer Flores at first base and James Outman in the outfield. And then for FanDuel, I have Alex Bregman, Outman, and Slater in the lineup there. This slate really is kind of rough. I think the pitching seems a little overpriced, and the basemen are kind of overpriced as well for the most part. We do have a couple value plays for some of the positions, but it's really hard to find a lot of great value today. So paying up for pitchers is going to be somewhat annoying today, but with that said, let's get into it. We'll start with Kodai Senga for the Mets. Sorry for butchering your name. The K rate here makes him viable, and he's facing the worst opponent that he's faced this season. That said, he's high risk, high reward at this price, but there isn't a ton of top tier options, so he's in play. Obviously, he's fairly expensive, so that definitely makes him hard to roster a little bit. Bryce Elder is also interesting today. He's faced St. Louis, Cincinnati, Kansas City, and Houston so far this season. And he's managed 20 fantasy points in 3 of those games, including 6 strikeouts in those 3, at least. And then Miami is the worst team he's faced this season, and he's given up a total of 3 earned runs, which that was against Kansas City, ironically. But last season he started off a bit rough, but then settled in and had 4 18 fantasy point games in the last 5 games he started. And he seems like he's building on that, so he looks like a pretty decent option, and his K rate is pretty solid today as well. Then we'll look at Patrick Sandoval. Now, he is kind of a value Hail Mary, kind of a value play today against Oakland. He hasn't broken 20 fantasy points yet this season, but he did face Oakland and get the win last time. The K rate is a big issue here, and he does not have very many. However, he had 3 19 fantasy point games against Oakland last season, and 4 starts, and he had at least 4 strikeouts in each of those games. He's a high risk, but he's a mid-level price, at $6,500, so that makes him viable here. But he is risky because he doesn't get the strikeouts a lot, and even though the matchup is pretty good, it's not as good as it was last year. Tony Gonsolin for the Dodgers is interesting today. He's at $7,000, but this is his first start back after having a really good season last year. We'll have to wait and see kind of how if he's gonna play a full complement of pitches today. But I kind of expect him to get pulled once he gets over 60 or so pitches. We'll have to wait and see though, and it's kind of an irritating matchup because Pittsburgh is hitting the ball really well as a team. Then we'll look at Logan Gilbert for Seattle. Now he's in a really good spot here. He is coming off a potential injury. I mean, he was just kind of feeling bad the last time he was scheduled to start, so he got pushed back. It is a tough matchup though against Philly, who's a pretty good team, and the K rate for Gilbert isn't awful, which gives him some viability. He's a good alternative to like Bryce Elder as kind of a P1 option, but he is pretty risky due to the matchup. And then finally, Sandy Alcantara for Miami. Now, he's got a high-risk, high-reward situation here. He's extremely expensive for the slate, but in 3 starts versus Atlanta last year, he scored 30 fantasy points twice, though he had a negative score in the other one. This is a high-risk game because of their top-tier offense. The bonus here is Atlanta is striking out a lot this season, which does give him some upside, and they basically give a free play if Ozuna is in the lineup. So we'll have to wait and see how that lineup sets up, but he definitely has some utility on the slate, but he is high risk, high reward, and it's going to be hard to roster 2 of the, over the 9,500 options on the slate. With that said, let's get into our catchers now, and we definitely have a couple options here, but they are kind of annoying because of the pricing. JT Realmuto is probably the best option on the slate, though he's fairly expensive. He has home run potential in this game, but he's really hard to roster due to the fact that there's not a ton of value at a lot of other positions. Wilson Contreras for St. Louis has some unique upside here, though it's not an ideal matchup in a tough pit in a pitcher's park as well. And so, as much as I feel like that he doesn't have the best home run upside in this particular matchup. Cal Raleigh is probably the guy I like the most for Seattle, though he hasn't hit the ball particularly well. He does have some utility in this matchup, and he has some upside just because of the price. And then finally, Christian Bethancourt. He's kind of a Hail Mary option on this slate, but he's hit the ball really well to start the season, and he definitely has home run potential in this matchup, but it is high risk, high reward, considering the fact he's going up against a pitcher he's never faced before. So he is definitely in play here. Then we'll look at first base and Freddie Freeman. Obviously, super good option on the slate. He's got really good metrics for this matchup against Pittsburgh, and but it is kind of risky due to his price. My favorite option at this position is Wilmer Flores, simply because he's super cheap and he's got a really good matchup here, and he has some nice upside for a fantasy perspective. Then we'll look at Ohtani, who's also in play with the LA Angels stack. He has some utility here, can also play in outfield. I'm also going to mention Brandon Drury, because I don't really think he's a great play today, but he has hit the ball pretty well the last couple games. And LA, is facing a new pitcher today, and they could manage to score some runs on him. And moving on to second base, we're going to look at Brandon Lowe. And this is where things get kind of rough when it comes to the different options. Lowe has kind of been really bad the last 3 games. However, he did take a game off, so maybe he'll get back to swinging like he was. But he's been somewhat up and down throughout the season, and he tends to have some games where he does big things and then have other games where he does goose eggs. Nolan Gorman is a good option here at this position. He's hitting the ball pretty well. He's had a decent chunk of home runs already this season as well, though his price is pretty high, which makes him kind of unideal, but he is definitely in play. And then Colton Wong, he's a great value play here. He has high risk, high reward. He hasn't hit the ball particularly well to start the year, but he has home run potential in this matchup, and the metrics jump off the chart for this particular situation. So he's definitely in play on the slate. Manny Machado for San Diego is in an interesting spot here against Smiley. Now, Smiley is usually not a very good pitcher, but he's had a couple really good games this year, so he is a little bit risky, especially with this game being pretty cold. But Machado is a guy who hasn't hit the ball well, but he has had some streaks of some decent hits, and he also has home run potential in this matchup, so he is definitely viable, but he's high risk, high reward. Alex Bregman is the better choice at third base, though he's pretty expensive as well. He's hitting the ball, below his averages, but he is getting a lot of fantasy points on the board, and even has managed to get walked quite a bit this season, which definitely gives him some opportunity here. He also has home run potential in this matchup. Then we'll look at Xander Bogaerts in the shortstop position. Now, again, similar situation for the Padres against a decent pitcher, or a bad pitcher who's doing pretty good this season. But he has some nice upside in this matchup. He's hitting the ball extremely well, and he's definitely in play as a decent option. An alternative to him is Thairo Estrada, but he's also fairly expensive. I don't like him near as much, but he's definitely in play here as an option at this position if you need to save a little bit of money. There's just not a lot at the shortstop and third base positions that are cheap. And moving into the outfield, Ottman for the Dodgers has just been absolutely tearing the ball up so far this season, and he looks like he's in play again as a great matchup here against Pittsburgh, so he's definitely a top-tier play on the slate. Mike Trout obviously has a nice upside matchup here against Medina, and he has hit 2 home runs the last 4 games, and he's been over 10 fantasy points in 3 of the 4, and so I really like his upside here. His prices come back up all the way almost, but he's still viable on the slate if you can figure out how to fit him in. Austin Slater is kind of a sneaky play today. He's only played 1 game to start the year, but he had 2 hits out of 3 at-bats in the first game, and he has some upside here. He actually does have home run potential in this matchup, and so I definitely think he's viable in this situation. Kyle Tucker also has some nice upside in this matchup for Houston, though it is a tough matchup. He is hitting the ball extremely well. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate if you could actually fit him in, but he's going to be extremely difficult to fit in. Haniger for San Francisco also jumps off the screen as a really good option on the slate. He only started 1 game so far this season as well, but he has some nice upside here, and he's definitely in an interesting spot. He definitely has home run potential in this matchup, though his price is not super ideal. He is rosterable, though, if you can fit him in. And then Nemo for the Mets. He's been hitting the ball pretty well to start the year. He also has stolen base potential, which definitely gives him some upside. And he's just a guy that manages to score some fantasy points most days. And then Taylor Ward is a good contrarian option at this outfield position. He's high risk, high reward here, but if you want to beat up on a new pitcher and you think LA might do it, then he would be somebody to help you fit in a LA Angels stack. So that's what I have for DraftKings. Moving over to FanDuel, we're really going to only look at two pitchers here, and that's Senga and Elder. Now, Senga's price is a little bit cheaper than Elder, and his K rate makes him viable. As you can see, he's had 240 fantasy point games and 220 fantasy point games. He's a little bit risky on the slate, but he's got a great matchup, and so he's definitely worth consideration. Bryce Elder, I do like him a little bit more. He is pretty expensive, but there's enough value on FanDuel that you can pretty much work in however you want here to pay up for some guys. And you can fit him in the slate. He's had 3 games over 40 fantasy points this season, and he's in a really good spot for a nice matchup and a good opportunity. Moving into the catchers and first baseman, there's really 3 guys to look at. First being Freddie Freeman at $3,500. He is rosterable even if you pay up at pitcher. He has some nice upside here, and he's definitely worth consideration today. We also like Pete Alonso, who's a little bit expensive, probably hard to roster today, just with the home run potential, but he's had 3 straight really bad games, so do keep that in mind. And then Wilmer Flores, he looks like a great play on the slate, especially with this price point being at $2,800 for San Francisco. He has some boomer bust mentality, but he's cheap, and he's got home run potential in this matchup, so I definitely think he's viable here. Brandon Lowe for second base is a very interesting option here, though he is fairly expensive. He is rosterable on the slate. He's been somewhat boomer bust throughout the start of the season, but he definitely has some utility here. Mookie Betts also priced pretty fairly here on FanDuel, and so he's definitely in play today as a home run hitter and guy that can get steals. And then Nolan Gorman is almost identically priced, but he is viable on the slate as well. He definitely has some nice upside, and he's hitting the ball extremely well to start the year. And then Colton Wong is a great value play at this position. He's just very cheap. He's high risk, high reward, though, because he hasn't hit a home run yet this season. But he definitely has utility here, and this is a good matchup for him to do it in. Then we'll look at Manny Machado at third base. He has some upside, though. He hasn't been good to start the season, only hitting .213. This is also a tough matchup when it comes to, the potential for batters, but he is in play. Austin Riley is around the same price, and he definitely has some upside here. He's hitting the ball pretty well to start the year, and he's getting home runs in different situations, and this is a decent situation for him. Alex Bregman is one of my core plays, and I really do like him at his price. He's just a little bit too cheap for all the potential he's got. He's been getting on base, doing things pretty good to start the season, and Houston does have tendency to score some runs, and that definitely gives him some upside in this matchup, especially with home run potential. And you could also fit Wilmer Flores here at third base as well if you wanted to. At shortstop, Xander Bogaerts is really my favorite option at this spot. His price is not ideal, but his batting average is, and so he's definitely in play here. He was almost going to be a core play, but I just thought he was a little bit too expensive to make a core play at this point. James Outman for outfield is also a really good spot here. He's priced almost as the same as Bogaerts, but he has big time upside. He's had some really massive games. He seems to be kind of a flurry kind of guy, but he has some good upside, and his price is reasonable enough here to make him worthwhile. Mike Trout obviously has super high potential in this game, especially against a new pitcher who are going to have a really tough lineup to face. If Trace Thompson draws a start, he would be somebody that would be in play. I'm not sure that he'll play today, but he is definitely worth a look if he does draw a start today. And so do keep that in mind. But he's he's kind of a home run or miss option. Kyle Schwarber also has some utility today. His price is cheap enough that he's viable, but he is a boomer bust option on the slate. Ohtani is also in play today. Just keep that in mind. Slater is also he's a really good option on this slate. He is a core play just because of his price. At just $2,000, he really does help you pay up for some other options, and so he's a very good option here. He's got good potential in this particular matchup. He also has stolen base potential, in my opinion, here as well. So if he can get on base, then there's a good chance he'll swipe a couple. Then we'll look at Haniger. Also for San Francisco, he has some nice utility here. He's only started one game, but he did manage to get walked and get a RBI in his one game so far. So I do like his upside here. He also has home run potential, which definitely gives him some utility, and his price is nice and cheap over here. And then Taylor Ward for the Angels. He's kind of a high-risk Hail Mary play today, sort of, but he's a good way to stack the Angels if you want. He's pretty cheap, and he's definitely got some viability. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.